what is pipes used for? Transforming data. Basically, we use pipes for filtering our list. And what else? Pipe of something that we discussed. Anything else? Property binding, event binding. Property binding, you use it. I mean, you implement using square brackets, and event binding using parentheses. And what else? Services. Basically, the equivalent of functions in any other language. When it comes down to Angular, it becomes services. Like if you want to reuse anything, you just create a service, and then you inject it at any component, like wherever it's necessary. What else? Event binding, and what else? Event binding, property binding, service, then pipes. Then we also discussed about one more thing. If you get some lifecycle methods, we discussed about ng on and then ng on destroy. There is one more, which is ng on changes. Anything else? Exactly. So what is input decorator? It's used for. What is input decorator? Anyway. If the parent wants to communicate to the child has to expose a variable which is decorated using the input decorator so that it can do the binding and it can pass data down to the child component. All right, perfect. So this is where we are, and this is our rating component, which is the child, and we exposed a variable using the input decorator, and the parent was able to do the binding by using property binding because it's a property, and it is using the property binding, it was able to pass the value of rating to the child, and we use that value to limit the number of stars that we show for the rating. So we know how to pass values from parent to the child. So, but what if the child wants to send the data back to the parent? So how do you do the reverse? So the rule is just the same. Again, the child has to like allow the parent to do that. So what exactly can do is, again, the child has to expose a variable. So imagine if you, in this scenario, what we are trying to do is, this is our child component, and whenever an event happens in this child component, I want to send some data to the parent, right? So here, the only way that a child can communicate to the parent is by relying on an event. So anything happens at that point of time, you can capture that event and send some data to the parent. So input was fairly simple. You decorate a variable using input decorator, and the parent can do the binding. The value will be available to the child. But if I have to do the reverse, it has to be done through an event. So since that is a rule, what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to attach an event to the child component, which is this. And I'm just going to attach a click event to the rating component. So I'm just saying click. And what do you think I have to give here as a value? I'm doing an event binding here, which is click, and I'm supposed to give a value here, which will be a function, right? So I'm just saying send data to parent. So when I click this, when I click anywhere within this component, it will try to call a method which is called send data to parent. So where do I go and declare this function? In the TS file of that respective component, which is rating, which is right here. So I'm just going to create that function. So now when that event happens, this function will get triggered, and I have to write some logic so that I can send data from this component to the parent. So as I said, if the child wants to communicate to the parent, it has to be done only through an event, right? So what really needs here is I just need to declare a variable right here, and I have to declare it. I mean, I have to decorate it using a different decorator, and that decorator is output. So we use input decorator to send data from parent to child. So we're going to use output decorator to send data from child to the parent. So I'm going to name that as rating event. That's the name that I have given for that variable. So I'm going to rely on this variable. Sorry, that's a typo. I'm going to rely on this variable right here by accessing it using this keyword. So I'll just say something like this dot rating event, and using that variable, I have to emit an event. So I guess covered the topic of event handling and event emitters in Java. How do you basically emit an event? Like, Have you guys covered in Java?
Basically, a list of functions and then you add it to the list.
REST. No, I'm not talking about API level. It's basically, let's imagine you have an object, and using that object, I have to emit an event, so that somewhere else in some other parts in my application can just listen to that event. I guess cover that topic in Java. No. Have you guys learned about event emitters?
No.
No. Okay. So that is completely new. So anyway, so I have this variable called rating event. So I want to use this variable to emit an event. So which means whatever that is getting stored into this variable has to be an instance of event emitter. So when if you have an instance of event emitter, you can call methods like emit, which will actually emit an event. That's how it works. So along with that event, you can also send the event payload, which becomes the data that you want to send to the other part. In this case, it is from child to parent. So how do I get the instance of an event emitter? You can directly just say new event emitter. And by default, the include is wrong. This is not the import statement for event emitter. It has to be from Angular core. So I'm just going to just correct that. So I decorated a variable using the output decorator, and I just said like whatever that is getting stored into that variable is an instance of event emitter. And if you guys remember, whenever we declare a variable in TypeScript, we are also supposed to specify the data type of that variable, right? Or the type of that variable. So we haven't declared it here, so I'm just going to correct that. So I'm just saying it is going to be of type event emitter. So you can just say event. It's going to be of type event emitter, and it has a default value, which is the instance of event emitter. And you can see that there is an error, and it just says that requires one type argument. So what exactly is that type argument is, whenever an event happens, as I said, we can also send data along with that event as an event payload. So you're supposed to specify the data type of that event payload, whatever that you're sending. If you're trying to send a string, or we are trying to send an array or an object, you're supposed to specify the data type here. So the way that you specify the data type is by using a different syntax altogether. You just use this. That's the syntax that you use, and within this, you're supposed to pass the data type. So I'm just saying string. And that's exactly what this whole statement means. So you're declaring a variable which is of type event emitter, and the data type of the event payload is string, and into this you're storing an instance of event emitter. Is that clear, the statement? And using this variable, you decorated using the output decorator, which means it can be used to send data from child to the parent. So now what we have is, whenever I go and click on this component, this function will get triggered, and I have this access to this variable called rating event, and I can directly use one method called emit, which will actually emit an event. And if you want to pass any data along with this event, you can give it as a parameter here. So I'm just saying rating value equals this dot rating. And that's the output that I want to send it back to the parent. Is this clear till now, everyone? Clear? Okay. So now, like, to complete the entire process, whatever that we are supposed to do with the child, we completely did it. So whenever a click event happens, we are capturing that, and within the callback, you are sending another event to the parent. So the parent can listen for that event and consume it and get the data, right? So now going back to the parent, this is where I'm using the child component. So when we use input decorator to decorate a variable, we use property binding. So what do you think I have to use for this variable that I have here, which is rating event? It should be an event binding. That is just because it is holding an instance of event emitter. So instead of using property binding, just like we did for the input decorator, we're going to use event binding. So it becomes this. It's just an event binding. Before also we did the same thing for click, right? Something very similar, we are doing it for the variable that we just created, which is rating event. This is clear. So again, what do you think I have to give here? So normally what will you give if it is just something like this? Obviously, it's an event, and you're supposed to pass a callback for that event. And that's exactly the same rule for this also, because rating event is also a different type of event. And whenever that event happens, you're supposed to pass a callback for it. So I'm just saying receive data from parent. Very bad naming convention. Don't use this. It's just for the clarity that I'm using such weird names. So where do you think I have to go and create this function? Where? Within the product component, I have to go and declare this function. And along with this, I'm just also passing a variable which is available in Angular, which is called $event, which is basically the information of that event, so that you can receive all the event payload and stuff like that within this function. So let's go and declare this function within the products component right here. So now the child and the parent is connected each other using event. And whenever that event happens in the child, this function will get triggered in the parent. And if you remember, when you go to rating component, whenever that event happens, you're passing some data along with that event. So how do you capture that? You can just capture that using a variable right here. It's just by adding a parameter to it. So you can just say something like value, which is going to be a type string, because you already denoted or you already marked the data type of the payload to be string. And in here, let's see whether we are receiving the data. So I'm just saying alert value, right? So let's go back into this and see whether that works. So if I go and click on this, I'm getting an alert. I'm getting the rating value here. And this data is completely coming from the child, and the parent was able to receive that data. And if I go and click on anything else, I'll get a different value. It's 3.7. And in here, it is going to be 4.6. So to make this happen, what we did is, like, first of all, the rating component had to expose a variable called rating event, and into which we just created an instance of event emitter. And whenever an event happened in the child, we call the function and we use the same variable to emit an event to the parent. So since the variable that we decorated using the output decorator is holding an instance of event emitter, instead of using property binding, we ended up using event binding. And since it is an event, we have to have a callback for it. So we declared a callback within the parent, and we received all the data. So tomorrow, in this case, if you want to send an object, so only thing that you have to do is just change the data type from string to any, or just give it as an object, so that you can pass multiple values from child to the parent instead of just having just one value. Is that clear? Okay. Right. Okay. What else? Okay. Let me just close this rating and even this. So the only component that we still have, which is kind of the main component, is the products component that we have. So tomorrow, if I have to just create another components and I have to use the same panel in multiple places, so what exactly you'll end up doing is you just copy paste the same code, right? The panel heading and panel primary and panel body. And tomorrow, imagine your application has grown and you have like 10 or 15 different components, and all the components are using panel. And all of a sudden you got a requirement saying that you just have to ignore panel and you just have to come up with a different component altogether. Just like panel, you have to use something else. So the only way you can do that is you just have to go and modify all the 10 to 15 different components and just get rid of the styling and implement the new styling, right? So you understood the problem? Okay. So now, instead of doing that, what you could always do is you can just have a higher order component where you define the styles and use that higher order component in all the 10 to 15 different components. So tomorrow, if I have to go and change the style, you only edit it in one place. It gets automatically reflected in all the other places. So you just have one place to like maintain your entire layout that you want to use it with your components. The way that you can do is, there is a concept called content projection in Angular. So you create a higher order component and you project the data that you want to make it available to that higher order component. So to demonstrate that, I'm just going to create a new component altogether. I'm just going to name that as ngg component. What do I give? Miscellaneous / let's say panel box. So I'm going to create a component called panel box. It did create all the files necessary, and it also updated my app modules, which means I'm good to use this within my application. So let me just run my server. Okay, so let me just go here. and use that. So this is the HTML and this is the TypeScript. I don't have to do anything with the TypeScript file. It's more to do with the template. So let me just define my panel here and let's see how exactly we can pull the information and make it available in this component. Let me just quickly define one. So I'm just going to define a class, saying panel primary div class panel heading. The heading has to come here somehow, and I do have a place where I can just use it for showing my real content. So I'm using panel body, right? So I declared one component where have an empty panel, and let's go and use this within my app component where we are actually displaying the products. So here I'm just going to use app-panel-box. Let's save this. Oops, did I give a wrong selector? Oh yeah, did I give wrong? Oh yeah, it's panel-primary. Okay. Okay, so now I have an empty panel here. So I want to use this somehow within this component. So tomorrow, if someone asks me to just completely change the style, I just have only one file to go and edit. It should automatically reflect in my entire application. The only problem here is this is the products component, which is actually displaying all the data. But how do I just make this data, which is products, available for my panel heading, and this entire data, which is available in this panel body, to be available right here? So for that, we use something called content projection. And the directive or the tag that helps us to do is something called ng-content. So you can use ng-content, which is a tag which helps us to implement content projection, which helps us to like pull values from the other components and make it available here. So I'm just giving ng-content here. And how do I select the data is by using an attribute called select itself. So you can just say select and specify what you want to select. So I'm just saying I want to select something called panel title. And here for the body, I'm defining a new selector here. I'm just saying panel-body. So it doesn't make any difference if I go back in here. It's still the same because we haven't used this component within the products component here. So let's go and use this. So I'm just using, let me just get rid of this panel box from here. So let's go back to this, and I'm just directly putting app-panel-box. And from within this, I have to pass the value for title and the body. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to introduce span. I'm just saying products. But how do I reach this over there? So even if I save this, it doesn't make any difference. If I go here, it is still the same. It's blank. So somehow I just want to make this data available for this selector. And the way that you can do is you can directly use this selector and just specify it over here. So the moment that you do this, you can see that the products is available here in my higher order component that I just created. Same thing you can do for your entire content. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to just copy this. And let me just put it here. Let me just get rid of this entire panel. I'm going to just push it right here. And the selector is, it's not class, you just have to just give panel-body. Save this, and you have your entire data here. So if you guys notice one thing, we haven't defined our panel here. Instead, it is completely coming from a different component altogether, which is this. So tomorrow, if I had to go and change the style, I just have to only change it right here. And from primary, I want to change it to success. You just go and do it here. It will reflect my entire application system, and just like it did here. The only thing is don't use the panel directly. Instead, you use the component that you just created, which is panel box. Is that clear? So the only thing that you have to note here is how exactly you pull the content. For that, you just need to use this tag called ng-content, and you define your own selector. You can give any selector you want here. You can even give just title. You can just give body. You can give anything. The only rule is make sure that it doesn't create any kind of conflict with the built-in attributes. That's the only thing. Is that clear, the concept of content projection? Clear, everyone? Okay. Just close this, and this. Okay, so now we have this entire products component. It works fine. So now I'm going to just think of creating a different component, which I want to use it to show the details of one component. So from this list, if I click somewhere here, I want to load a different component altogether, which will just only display the content of or the information of this respective product. Basically, I want to create a detailed page for a product, right? So for that, again, the rule is the same. You just have to create a new component. So I'm going to name that as GG component products / detail. So we already have one component called products, which we used to show the list of the products. So now we have created a new component called detail, which we can use it to show the details of one respective component. So it updated my app module, so which we are good. So I'm just running my server. Okay. So we did create one component right here. So if we open products, we have detail as well now. And this is a TypeScript, and this is the HTML file for it. So now the problem is, like, from this, we have right now, instead of having one component, we have two different components, list and detail. So how do I show the detail component? So one way I can do is I can just go here to the products, to the app component right over here. And just like I included this, I can also include app-detail. So which should display the contents from the detail component. So this is my list component, which is products, and this is my detail component. Obviously, this works fine with two components. What if I have like 15 or 16 or 50 different components? Obviously, I cannot put all those components in the main index page itself. So there has to be a way by which you can navigate across components whenever we really need those components. And that's when you think of implementing routing. So don't confuse yourself with the routing that you implement in your server. In the server, any kind of routing that you implement, it is basically for your API. And when it comes down to Angular, it is only for loading a respective view. It has nothing to do with data. Any sort of routing that you implement within the Angular is completely a client-side routing, and it's just a way to navigate across different views. That's all it is, right? So the kind of question I always get is, like, we already have a routing in server, then why do we really need a routing in the Angular? So just understand both of them are completely different. This is client-side, whereas the other one is server-side, which is just more of dealing with data, right? So I'm just going to remove this from here. Let it be just one. And let me just quickly show you how exactly we can implement routing. So whenever you started creating a project using that ng new, the project name, it asks few questions like, do you want to implement routing? You most probably have given yes for it. So if you're given yes, what it does is, if you go to your app module, it automatically created one module, extra module called app-routing module, if you're given yes. And that module is directly available here. And this is where we go and implement all our routing. So if you guys remember, for working with two-way data binding, we included a new module called forms module. So just like that, if you want to implement routing, you need access to a different module called router module. And that's included right over here within the imports array. For implementing routing, you need to have the router module access or the reference, and from there you're trying to call a function called for route. And that's a function which is responsible for implementing all the routing rules. You can see that it is referring to one variable called routes. You don't really need this. You can directly implement all the routing here. But since I have given the way to do that, let's use this array to implement all the routing that we really need in our application. Right. So this is an array. And let's imagine if you want to implement 5 different routing, which means you'll end up creating 5 different objects here. So each route configuration becomes one object. So if you're looking at our application, we need obviously a route for loading our products page. We also need a routing for loading our detail page. And we obviously will create one more page for a welcome page, like something like a home page. So let's imagine we are having 3 different pages, which means we have to declare like 3 different route configurations here, right? So how exactly can we do that? You just pass an object with 2 properties. The first one is something called path, which will define the URL pattern that you want to create. So I'm just saying I want to create a URL, something called products. So anyone who goes into this URL, which is localhost / 4200 / products, it should display the products component. And if I go to something called detail, it should load my detail component. If I go something like localhost port number / home, it should display my home page. So that's exactly what you provide as a first parameter here for your path property. So whenever I go to products route, what do I need to load? I need to load a component. And that's the second property here, component. And which component you want to load? I'm just saying I want to load products component. And that's pretty much it for creating a route configuration. So this is how it look like with 2 properties, path and component. So similarly, I also need one for the detail page. Again, the rule is same. You just give path. Here you can give detail if you want, but I rather suggest you to just use the same URL. So I'm just saying products here. But from the list page, if I have to navigate to the detail page, I need to have some sort of a parameter, which will help me to understand, okay, this is the product that I want to load. So if you imagine this, from this list page, if I click on this product, I load the detail page of it. So from the URL itself, I should be able to read some value, which will help me to understand I want to load leaf rake, or I want to load garden cart. That's the product that I want to load. So that's the reason why I'm using the same URL, but in this case, it will have a URL parameter. So I'm just saying PID, which stands for product ID. You can give any name. There is no rule in naming this parameter. You can give any parameter name. The only rule is like you have to use the same name to retrieve the value from the URL. That's the only thing. So you have path, and whenever a user requests a path which matches this pattern, I want to load a different component at that point, which is detail component. So we declared 2 different routing, one for listing all our products, which is basically the products list page. And from there, I want to load the detail page. So we have the second routing, which is defined for that. Is that clear? Okay. So I'm going to define 2 more routes. The first one is basically, I'm giving it as blank, which means for this page, I'm not given anything. So what happens when the user goes to the root path, which is just slash, what do you want to show? So if you really want to show a home page, you can just go and create the home component and you can link it here. Since we haven't created the home component, I'm just saying I just want to redirect to products. So if you have already created a home component, you can definitely do the same thing here also. You can just say component and you can link the home component there. Since we don't have that, I'm just redirecting to products itself. And then you have the final one, which will look something like this, which stands for all the invalid route access to your application. So right now you know that your application only supports 3 URL. The first one is slash, the next one is /products, and the third one is /product/ an ID. If I try something like profile, /account, /login, all those routes are not available here. So instead of showing a broken page, you can write a route definition which looks like this. It caters for all the invalid routes. So in that case, what you can do is either you can create an error component and you can link it here, or since we don't have that, I'm just directly redirecting to products. Is the route configuration clear for everyone? Any doubts in this? No? Cool. So one more property right here, and when you define the root path, is something called path match, and you can give the value as full. And the reason why you're doing this is So imagine the route configuration that we have. We have something called slash, which is this line 9. We have something called slash products. We have something like slash products. Sorry. We have something which looks like slash products slash 1234 or something like this, right? These are the only 3 routes that I have. And when you look at this route, which is slash, which is for the root path, it actually matches all the 3 routes. It will match the first one. It also matches this. It also matches this. So by giving this property, which is path match full, you're saying that if I have to load the root path configuration, it has to completely match this. It should not just match these 2 things. It has to completely match that URL pattern, which is just slash. It should not take any of these configurations. That's exactly what is specified by giving this property called path match full. And it is mandatory that you have to give it. Otherwise, it might load, when you go to slash root, it might load all the 3 components at that page. So it will end up in a conflict. So instead, to avoid that, it is mandatory that you need to give this property here. Only for this, only for the root path. All right. Is that clear for everyone? The configurations? Okay. So now, since I have implemented this, you can see that directly it started loading products. The what do you call that? The URL pattern has automatically converted that into products. And if you try something else, if I go to the root path, it will again redirect me back to slash products. And if I something which is not defined, so let's say something like this, which is not supported in my application, when I hit enter, again it goes into the root, and from there it again loads the products. Is that clear? Okay. Let me just check whether I haven't made any typo just by going, oh yeah, I do have an error. What is that? Cannot match any routes. That's exactly what I've given here. Oh yeah, there is a typo here. Okay. So now it should work. So if I try something like which is not there, it is again going back to products. But what if I try something like this? Let's say products slash, this is the ID. I'm just giving an ID. Instead of loading the detail component, it is still loading the products component. So this is a URL pattern for the products detail component, right? Not the list, but still it is loading the products component. Any guess why this is happening? It does match the ID. I mean, basically it's just a rule that you're given here. The ID can be anything. So it's completely up to you, like how you want to match that ID. So it can be anything.
There is no detail component.
There is a detail component. We already created one detail component. There is one, and it has been linked here. What was that? Exactly. That is what I'm trying to say. Like there is nothing to do with matching the ID. So basically, you're trying to say is I have a URL. I can pass an ID. That's the provision that you're giving. And once the detail component is loaded, that is when you really check the validity of that ID. So that doesn't prevent you from loading the component. That should not prevent you from loading the component. No.
Do we have to give the path match full in that?
No. The problem here is, what is the main component of your application? Your main component of your application is always app, and that's where you start loading all your pages. And if you go to your app component, you can see that no matter what URL that you're requesting, it is always showing the products component, right? So I have to get rid of this. I'll get rid of this, save this. Now, if I go back, I'll see a blank page. It matched the URL. And even if I go to products, it will still show a blank page. That is just because every time, no matter what URL that you request, it will always load this page. And you have to somehow link your app component with the respective route configuration. And the way that you do is by defining a container where the Angular can actually dump all your view files or the content of your view. And the way that you do it by just by giving a container for it, and the container is something called router outlet. Oops, I made a typo again. Router outlet. Come on. All right, save. So now if I go back, when I go to products, it is actually loading the products component. And if I go to something like products slash an ID, it actually loaded my detail component. So now if I again go back to this products, it will still show the values from the products. So now I'm able to like navigate between components. When I go to /products, I'm able to load the contents from products component, and when I go to that product / a particular ID, it is actually able to load the detail component as well. So this is where all your views is going to be available, this entire space over here. Is that clear? The way that you can implement routing. The first thing is you have to go and define all your routing rules here within the routing module. And once that is defined, you can go to the app module and you can just use this tag, which is called router outlet, which acts like a container where all your views is going to be available. And you can define the way that you want the router to look like. If you can restrict the width, if you want to do that, you can do that. If you notice, you already restricted the size by giving this container. If you get rid of this container, it will actually utilize the entire space. If I just save this without having that, it is going to utilize the entire space. So you can define everything. So since I didn't want to stretch the entire page, I just given a wrapping tag by just giving a div. Just get rid of this. Save it. So now it is like centered. Is that clear? Okay. So now if I know the URL, I can always navigate between products list page, and I can go to the products detail page also. But how can I do that with the help of HTML? So I have this list page, and somehow using navigation, I have to click somewhere, any of these information, which will help me to take me to the detail page of it. So what do you think I have to do here? And this is my products list page, which is right here. So what do you think I have to do here? Link my list page detail page. Normally, how do you link between HTML pages? Like let's say I have page 1, and from page 1 I want to go to page 2. You use anchor tag, and you just use a attribute called href, and you specify the URL there, right? Something similar also you have to do here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just want to provide an anchor tag for the product name, so that whenever I click on the product name, I will go from list page to the detail page. So I'm going to just do the same. Just going to give a href. I'm sorry, a anchor tag, and I'm going to give this. Let's give this value here. If I save, if I go back, you can see that now it has become an anchor tag. The only thing is we haven't provided the value for the URL where I want to navigate to, right? So how do I give this? Instead of using href, Angular uses a different property to bind the value of your href value. So that becomes, it's not href anymore, it becomes a property binding, and the property that you bind is something called router link. So use a property binding called router link to specify the URL where you want to navigate to. So that becomes something like this. So whenever I click on this product's name, I want to navigate to /products, and also have to pass a value to this. So this becomes the first item of the array, and the second item of the array that will become the ID that you want to pass. So I'm assuming that the product ID, I want to just specify the product code for it. So I'm just giving product code. So the URL will actually become /products/ the value of the product code. So the way that you specify, as I said, instead of using href, you use this property binding, and you specify the URL pattern, followed by, if you have any parameter, you can specify the parameters as the second item. And if you have 3 parameters, you can give comma separated, all the 3 parameters. So if I now go here, and if I save, you can see this URL right over here at the bottom left. If I hover on this, you see this URL that's product / the product code. And if I hover on the different one, you can see the product code is actually changing for each and every product. So now when I click on this, from the list page, I was able to navigate to the detail page. I can click back. Again, I get this. If I click this, again, I have the detail component that is getting loaded. Is that clear? So this is the detail component right here. And this is, oh, didn't I open the TypeScript file for it? Okay. This is a TypeScript file for my detail component. So any logic that you want to implement, you can implement it here and make the view available over here by using two-way data binding. Is that clear, guys? Okay. So now again, the question is, from the list page, when I navigate to the detail page, I have this data here, which helps me to identify the product that I want to load in this page, in this detail page. But the problem is, how do I retrieve this value from this URL? So if I am not able to read the value from the URL, I cannot do anything with the detail component, right? So how do how do I retrieve the value? So obviously I have to do it with the TypeScript file to read the value from the URL. So there is one property which is available within the router module itself, and that property is called activated route. So that property will help you to retrieve all the information from the route which is currently active. So that's why the naming convention is it's called as activated route. So let's import that, and I'll show you how exactly you can retrieve the value from the URL using that service. So I'm just saying import from Angular/router. It's called activated route, and you can use this and inject this, or just get an instance of this. I'm just saying private activated route equals this. And once you have this, you can get, I'm just trying to receive the value within the ng-on-init method. So I'm just saying this dot activated route, and you can see that it is going to result me a property called params. So you can just use params. So when I call this, it is not going to give me directly the parameter value. Instead, it is going to give me something called as an observable object. So it's a different concept altogether. It got recently introduced into the JavaScript environment. Do you guys remember the concept of promise? What is promise used for?
To retrieve async result.
Exactly. So to work with async functions, either you can implement callback, or a much more better way is to handle it using promise. So this is again one more method to work with your async functions, which is called observable. The main difference between an observable object compared to a promise object is, if you look at the promise object, it is just one response. Either it can be a resolve or it can be a reject, and there is no other communication anymore. That's the end of it, right? But with observable, it does the same thing, but the only problem is it is not restricted. The only good thing is it is not limited to just one response. It can have data periodically. It can emit it. Basically, it uses, I believe it uses event emitter behind the scenes to make that happen. So you can emit events whenever it's necessary. So this object, or when you access this property, it is going to return you an observable object. And if it is a promise object, how do you retrieve value from a promise object? You use a function called then, and you receive the value using the then function. And you most probably pass two functions, or you catch the exception using the catch function. So when it comes into observable, instead of using then function, you use a function called subscribe. Basically, you're just subscribing the data. So you can just directly use dot subscribe, and you can get the data by passing an arrow function here. Not necessary that you need to pass an arrow function. So you can just use console.log to see what exactly is being returned. It is going to return you another object with a key value pair. So the key becomes the key that you have mentioned right here, which is PID for that URL, which is basically the parameter. So if I go into this, now let's go and just check in my detail component whether it's actually loading. So go to the console. As I said, it is going to return you an object. If you open this, you can see that PID is the value that is available in this URL. So if you try changing this to something else, so I'm just saying 123. If I hit enter, I have the PID set to 123. So whatever value that is available as the first parameter, it will match it to, or it will map it to the URL variable that you're given when you actually configure your route. So tomorrow, if you want to give something instead of PID, if you want to just retrieve it using a property called P code or property code or product code, you can just change it over here. So instead of PID, it will show as P code. So that's how we can actually retrieve the value from the URL. And now, can anyone tell me, like, whenever I go to this detail page, instead of showing detail works, I just want to show the value of this URL here. I just want to display something like product code equals that value. So how do I do that? Looking at this code.
You can do a full data binding, and then subscribe, you assign the value.
What was that?
In HTML object component, the right there,
Yeah, I can do that. Or the only problem is I cannot access this variable called data. It is basically available within this function. So it has to be a variable within the class so that I can use it within my template. So I'm just going to define a variable. I'm just going to name that as, let's say, product code equals, or let's say number just set to any. So I'm just saying this dot product code equals data dot pid. So now I can use this variable within the view, right? So I can use this right here, and I'm just saying div, let's give class alert success product code. So now if I go here, I'll get the value here, which is 1, 2, 3. And if I go back here, I click on something else, I get the value this. Again, if I go back, click something else, I get a different value here. So we are able to like navigate across components now. From list page, I was able to go to the detail page using routing law concept. But now the only thing what I want to do now is when I go to the detail page, instead of just clicking on this back arrow, I need to provide a link which will help me to go back to the list page. So from the detail page, from the list page, I was able to go to the detail page by clicking on the link. I have to do the same thing to go back or to get me back to the list. So how can I do that? Right. So one thing you can do is you can also give a anchor tag here. Let's call something like back, and you can give the property binding, which is router link, and you can give the URL for products. But I don't want to do that. I have a button here. Let's say back. I'm just saying class ptn hyphen primary. So instead of an anchor tag, unfortunately, I have a button. When I click on this button, I want to go back to the list. So you guys understood how to implement anchor tag, right? You know how to use, how to do the same or solve this using anchor tag. Everyone knows it. Okay. That's the reason why I didn't want to show that. So now when I go and click on this button, I want to somehow take the control back to the list page. So what do you think I have to do here to make that happen? So normally if it was JavaScript, think in that perspective. If it was JavaScript, how do you do that? You attach an event handler to this, right? Because you have to capture that event, capture that click event. So let's do that first. So I'm just saying click. I have to call a function. So I'm just saying back to list. So now I have to go and declare this function in my component. So let's go to details component, and I'm just going to create the same function right here. So whenever I go and click on that button, this function will get triggered, right? So I have to write something in this function which will help me to go back to the list page. And the way that you can do is just like you got access to something called activated route, there is another instance that you can work with, which is called router itself. So you can use this router instance and you can call one function called navigate, and you can directly pass any URL pattern that will help you to take you to that URL if it is valid. So just like you did it with activated route, let's create an instance by putting it inside the constructor. So I'm just saying private router this. So now I can use this instance, copy this here. I'm just saying this dot, let's go router dot navigate, and you can pass in the configuration, which is products. So now when I go and click on this, that event is captured in this function called back to list, and it is working with the instance of router and calling the method called navigate, which will help you to get back to whatever pattern that you specify here. In this case, it's the products list page. So let's see whether it's working without any kind of issues. So when I click this, it is taking me back to the list page. And so now I can go back and forth. If I click on this, I'm getting the real page. When I click this, it is taking me back to the list page. Is that clear, guys? Everyone? Okay. So as an assignment, what you have to do is when I click on this list page, you're able to load the detail page. I want to load the entire details of that respective product here. So which means when I go and I mean, what are the information which is available? You have an image, you have a product name, you have product code, you have release date, price, rating, everything, whatever that you show here needs to be displayed within the detail page. Okay, show it within a panel also, and don't use the panel directly. Instead, use this what do you call that? The component that we just created, which is called panel box, which uses content projection. So everything is just in one place. You have the complete code control over the template. Try to complete this as an assignment. Okay. All right. Okay. So guys, tell me, like, do you have any doubts till now? Is it clear whatever that we have discussed? We discussed a lot of concepts in Angular. We discussed starting from components. We discussed about how to create components, how to work with service, how to work with pipes. How can you communicate across two components if it is nested? So you also have to understand how to communicate across sibling components, which I'll show you tomorrow. So we have, let's imagine you have nested components and you have to communicate between back and forth of two components. You can use input decorator and output decorator to communicate across components. And then we also discussed about routing. We also discussed about few services, which is called activated route to read the values from the URL, and router instance to navigate using JavaScript to navigate across pages. Is that clear till now, everyone? Any doubts, please come and clarify. If you're not able to talk here, please come and clarify afternoon when I'm there in my office. Okay. All right. So I'm just going to take a break. When I just say break, you're not allowed to go here. I'm taking a break from Angular. All right. So I'm just going to take a break from Angular, and let me just show you a small introduction to Node. So how many of you how many of you know anything about Node.js? Other than Node.js is again JavaScript that runs at the server. Other than that, any other idea about Node? Any idea? Basically, Node is a JavaScript runtime, which will help you to like run programs in your server, right? So it's a combination of few different things. Like obviously, you write every logic using JavaScript. So obviously, when you write logic using your JavaScript, your underlying operating system has to understand these commands that you try to execute using JavaScript. Obviously, your underlying operating system doesn't know anything about JavaScript. So how does this whole process works in Node.js? So the whole process works in Node.js by combining, as I said, few components. One such component is called libuv, and the other one is something called the V8 engine that is designed by Google. So whatever that you type or whatever that you write using JavaScript gets compiled to, in the end, it is compiling down into something called some code in C++. And that's the final code that is getting executed, which helps the entire application to work with the underlying operating system. So how does that happen? libuv is a component which is responsible for it. And the communication between libuv component and the JavaScript happens through your JavaScript V8 runtime that's designed by Google. So these are the three main internals in Node. The first thing is libuv, which is the entire C++, where the entire C++ program is running. And then you have something called V8, which is a JavaScript runtime engine that is designed by Google. And then you have your code, which is purely JavaScript. So why Node is, it becomes a lot easier for developers who knows JavaScript to work with server code. You just need to know JavaScript. You can create applications on the front end, you can create applications on the back end, you can do everything. And even to work with databases like Cassandra, MongoDB, and even with SQL environment, if it is Postgres, MySQL, SQL Server, everything can be communicated using your Node runtime. And you have different packages. So let's imagine you want to create an application that talks to MongoDB. The only thing that you have to do is you need to start your server using Node so that you know that there is a server which is running and you can access one API which will help you to talk to MongoDB. So which means you have to start a server, configure an API, and within that API to talk to MongoDB, you need a package for it. Everything is packaged in Node environment, everything. If you want to start a server, there's a package for it. If you want to work with the file system, you have a package for it. If you want to implement socket communication, you have a package for it. If you want to talk to MySQL, Postgres, MongoDB, Cassandra, for each and everything, you have different packages. You just need to know, obviously you need to know how MongoDB works, and you just need to know how Postgres works. And if you know how relational environment works, and if you want to do the same thing, you directly use packages. So one such package for communicating with MongoDB is called Mongoose. It's actually an ORM you can use. Even though it is like a NoSQL environment, but you still have the entire ORM, which helps you to communicate to your MongoDB. Everything is packages. And where do you get all these packages? You can directly go into one website called npmjs.com. So you go to npmjs.com. It's a huge collection of packages. You can search for anything. I showed you when we installed Bootstrap, right? Even not even just Node.js. You can think of any packages that you want. So if you just search for MySQL, you get a package for here, which will help you to communicate your node and runtime to MySQL database. And when you go into this, it gives you a lot more information about that package, on how to install, how to get started, how to communicate with your everything you'll have. So this is how you install it, and this is how we establish a connection, and this is how we really check whether the connection is established or not. Everything is JavaScript. It's a huge collection. Like, it's a huge in the sense, like, it's a huge collection. So to work with Node, I'll just give you a small introduction about Node. So within the same directory itself, for Angular, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm just going to name that as server. So let's open a new folder, going to name that as server. And I'm going to create a file called server.js within the same directory, saying server.js. So when I just said everything in Node it's been structured as a package, which means when you eventually create an application, you will end up using a lot of packages. So each package for your application becomes a dependency for your application. So imagine you are creating an application which requires 15 to 20 different packages from your Node. The package manager. So how do you really manage all these dependencies? You cannot trust on your memory to understand, okay, I'm using all these packages. Or you can even obviously you can write it somewhere and you can share that, okay, to make your application working, these are the packages that you need. But Node has a better way to handle these dependencies. And the way that you do is something called a file, which is called package.json. So you already have a file called package.json right here, because Angular has its own dependencies. Everything is being grouped here. So, but I'll show you how to get started with a package.json file. So let me just navigate to the server folder. So I have here, I don't have any other file within, oh yeah, I do have a file called server.js. So to create a package.json file of your own, either you can go and manually create it there, or you can run one command called npm space init, which will help you to initialize a package.json file. So when you run npm space init, it'll ask you a few questions on few basic informations, and eventually it will create a package.json file for you. So I'll just show you how exactly you can do that. Just run npm space, and by the way, npm stands for Node Package Manager. Just give init. And there is one flag called --yes. If you give this flag, it will skip all the questions and it will directly create a package.json file with default values. So don't skip that for the time being. Let's see what are the questions that is being asked. If you hit enter, it's asking what's the package name. You can skip that, or you can give a package name of one. It's basically your application name, whatever that you want to give it. I can give something called MATLabs. It's asking for the version. I'm going to skip that. I'm going to make it default by which is 1.0.0. It's asking for a description for your application. I'm going to skip that. Entry point, which is your entry point of my application. Obviously, it has to be server.js. So let it be server.js. Test command, we don't have any test suite, so let's skip that. Git repository, I don't have anything right now. Keywords, author, I can give, no, I don't want to give it my name. License, and it's asking whether all this information looks fine. I'm just saying yes, and that's it. So now if I go to this folder, I have a different file called package.json. This is exactly the information that we provided, right? So within this, all these informations, you know what these things are, and main is basically the entry point of your application, and scripts are the things that you can actually run using your command from the terminal. So there are two scripts that is already there. One is test, and by default it's going to throw an error because we don't have any test suites right now. And the starting point is basically start, and it actually points to a command called node space server.js, and that's exactly how you run any file within the Node runtime. And every file is just JavaScript with the extension .js. So imagine you created a file called app.js and you want to execute this at the node runtime, the only thing that you have to do is just give node space the file name. It will compile everything that has been written inside that file. So to show you that, let me just open server.js and I'm just writing console.log. I'm just saying hello everyone. If you want to just run this, you just need to go to this terminal and just run node space the file name. So that becomes server.js. And you have this output right here, just saying hello everyone. So the same thing can be done using something called npm space start. So when I run this command npm space start, what happens is it will go to this package.json file to read the configuration. So when I just run npm start, it goes into package.json and it sees that whenever a start command is issued, it has to run this command, which is node space server.js. So I can even use that command. I run this. You can see that it actually ran node space server.js, and again you have the same output, which is basically the response of your server.js file. Is that clear, everyone? Okay. I'm not going to go too in depth into Node. I just wanted to show you how exactly you can create an API using Node. That's the goal. So basically, you can start an application using an HTTP server, which is the most basic thing in Node, because there are a lot of limitations when you work directly with the HTTP server. You have to come up with each and every functions. So that's the reason why we always rely on some sort of a framework to develop our applications, right? So for creating REST API, you probably use Spring Boot in your Java environment to create REST APIs. Obviously, when I used to work with PHP, I used to work with a lot of frameworks like CakePHP, YII. There are so many frameworks that I use. For Python, you have Django. So here also, to work with Node applications, there are a lot of frameworks right now which is available, but the one such popular package is called Express. So Express is one framework that you use to develop your Node applications. It has all the functions which you really need to create your application. It has inbuilt functions which will help you to create your APIs. It has inbuilt functions which helps you to apply any sort of middleware within your application. There are so many benefits that you get when you rely on the Express application or the Express package to create your application. So to get started, what exactly you can do is you can just try installing the command. And if you have any doubts, as I said, you can go here to npmjs.com and search for that package. So if you open and if you just search for Express, you'll get this package here. And if you open this, it gives you the minimal code to get started with your Express application. So this is the install command we can use to install this. I'm going to copy this to install because we obviously need to install this. And it also gives you information about the main official website, documentation, everything is here. But I'll show you most of it. So let's go back to this terminal. And let me just run that command. So when I just run npm space install space express, obviously it will read the values from the repository and it will install that package within your application. But it is always mandatory that whenever you install a package, you're supposed to give a flag which is -- save. So when you give this flag, which is -- save, what happens is it will obviously install that package. At the same time, it will automatically modify your package.json file and it will keep track of the package that is installed. So let's see what happens when I install Express. When I'm just going to install this. So install, and you can suddenly see that there is one new property that has been added, which is called dependencies. And within the dependency, I know that I have installed Express. So it's just one file which keeps track of all the dependencies that you're trying to install in your application. So now if my application has to work, it has to install this dependency, and the version number is 4.16.4. So when you work with dependencies, it is completely classified into two different types of dependencies. One is production dependencies, which is this, or you also have dev dependencies, which is something to do with testing, integration testing, debugging. Like there are a few packages which helps you to do that as well. So that also gets grouped under a different thing called dev dependencies. So if you install any packages which is for your development environment, so suppose imagine you are installing or you're marking your Express as a dev dependency. So instead of giving --save, you're supposed to give --save -dev. So those packages gets grouped under this area, which is dev dependency. So those are the two main things that you have to really understand when you work with package.json file: dev dependencies and dependencies. Dependencies are just production dependencies, and dev dependency are completely for your development environment. Is that clear? Okay. So now we have this. So how exactly you can start a server is what I'm going to do. What I'm going to show you today. So the first thing is, any packages that you want to use it within this application, which is our server.js file, you have to first of all include that. In Angular, if I have to get the reference, you use the import statement to get the reference. But here, instead of directly using the import statement, you have a function which helps you to get or read the packages, and that function is called require. So you write something like constant express equals require express. This is the package that we just installed. So now we have the complete reference of that express package in this variable called express. And it is not mandatory that you need to give the same variable. You can give any variable name you want. So once you have this instance of express, I want to create an application object of using this express module. So I might write something like a constant app equals express. So this is the variable that I'm going to use throughout my application to create everything. For creating my API, starting my server, writing validations, applying middleware, everything, I'm going to just rely on this application object called app. So let me just quickly show you how exactly can I start a server. It is as simple as calling one function called listen. You just write app.listen. Two parameters. The first one is a port number. So I'm just saying I want to run my server at port 3000. And the second function is a callback, which gets triggered once your server is active and it is running. Just give me one moment. Hello? Oh, I am looking. Sure. Okay, so now, as I said, this callback will get triggered once your server is up and running. So you can write something like this just for your reference. So I'm just saying server running at localhost :3000. So now this is pretty much it for you to start an application or start a server using Express framework. So now if I go and run this right here, just running using node space server.js, it started my server and just saying the server is actually running at this port number, localhost :3000. So if I go to this port number using the browser, you don't see nothing. That is just because we haven't made anything available to the client. So everything that you design here is going to be a route, and that's basically your API. Is it clear till now, everyone? Okay, I'm just going to stop here now. I don't want to like really bombard you with topics. So just go through this and we'll continue from here tomorrow, and I'll show you how exactly you can create APIs with this runtime. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much for joining today.